The newspaper hit my parents' front porch just before sunrise. By 8 o'clock, half the town had already read the headline. By noon, every phone in my family's house was ringing. By evening, the lie they had forced me to carry for 13 years had become front-page news. I wasn't standing in my parents' living room when they first saw it. I was standing across the street inside a small coffee shop, watching through the window. Not because I wanted revenge, because after 13 years, I needed to see whether the truth could finally do what my voice never could. My mother opened the newspaper first. She frowned. Then her hand flew over her mouth. Dad took the paper from her before she could say anything. I watched his face lose every bit of color. He read the headline once, then again, then a third time, as if reading it enough times would somehow change the words. It didn't. Nothing could. Because printed across the front page, in bold black letters, was the story I'd been trying to tell since I was 21 years old. Only now, people were finally willing to believe it. My phone buzzed. Dad calling. I stared at the screen. For 13 years, I had dreamed about this moment. I imagined screaming, demanding an apology, making him admit he had chosen the family's reputation over his own daughter. Instead, he let it ring. A second later, another call. Mom calling. Then my older brother. Then my aunt. Then cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. One after another. Almost as if they had suddenly remembered I existed. Funny how quickly people find your number once the truth becomes public. A waitress placed a fresh cup of coffee on my table. "You okay?" I smiled politely. "I will be." She nodded and walked away. Outside, I watched my father rush to his truck. He wasn't going to work. He was coming to find me. Because for 13 years, my family had insisted I was confused, emotional, vindictive, a liar willing to destroy good people over something that never happened. Now the entire town knew someone had been lying. It just wasn't me. Looking back, I wish I could say I felt victorious. I didn't. I felt tired. Because winning after 13 years doesn't feel like winning. It feels like mourning the life you should have had all along. Another call lit up my screen. This time, it wasn't anyone from my family. It was the investigative journalist whose name now appeared beneath the article that had shattered an entire town's illusion. When I answered, she didn't waste time with small talk. Grace. They found another witness. I closed my eyes. Another one? Yes. And what he told us. She paused. Changes everything. At that moment, I realized the newspaper headline wasn't the end of my story. It was only the beginning of the truth everyone had spent 13 years trying to bury. To understand why my own family called me a liar, you have to go back to the summer when I still believed that telling the truth was enough. I had no idea that some people don't reject the truth because it isn't convincing. They reject it because believing it would destroy the life they've built around a lie. My name is Grace Carter. I was the middle child. My older brother, Michael, was the golden child. My younger sister, Lily, was everyone's little princess. That left me somewhere in between. Not ignored, not unloved, just expected to quietly do the right thing. Growing up, I didn't mind. Some children need attention. I needed purpose. When I was 12, I started volunteering at the town library. By 15, I spent weekends helping at the local food bank. By college, I was tutoring elementary school students whose parents couldn't afford private lessons. Helping people simply made sense to me. Mom used to smile whenever neighbors complimented me. Grace has always had a soft heart. Dad would laugh. Sometimes too soft. Maybe he was right. Because I always believed people deserved the benefit of the doubt. I believed honesty eventually won. I believed families protected each other. And I believed that if I ever found myself in trouble, my family would stand beside me. Looking back now, I wasn't naive. I was simply lucky enough to have never been tested. Not yet. Our family lived in a quiet town where everyone seemed to know everyone else's business. Dad owned a small hardware store on Main Street. Mom worked as the office manager at the local high school. Michael had become one of the town's biggest success stories. After graduating from college, he returned home and built a nonprofit youth center. People admired him. Local newspapers wrote glowing articles about his charity work. The mayor often invited him to community events. Teachers praised him. Parents trusted him. Whenever someone mentioned the Carter family, Michael's name always came first. "We're so proud of your son. You raised such a wonderful young man. He gives this town hope." Mom would glow with pride every time she heard those words. Dad never corrected anyone. Neither did I. Michael really did help a lot of people. At least, that's what all of us believed. I had a different dream. After graduating with a journalism degree, I joined a small regional newspaper as an investigative reporter. The pay wasn't impressive. My apartment leaked whenever it rained. Most of my assignments involved potholes, school board meetings, or restaurant inspections. But I loved every minute of it. My editor often reminded me, people don't hire reporters because they like good news. They hire us because someone has to ask uncomfortable questions. I took those words seriously. Truth mattered. Facts mattered. Evidence mattered. Those principles shaped every story I wrote. Ironically, they would also become the reason my own family stopped trusting me. Every Sunday evening, our family gathered for dinner. Mom insisted it was non-negotiable. Phones stayed off the table. Politics stayed out of conversation. And no one was allowed to leave until dessert. Those dinners were loud, comfortable, familiar. Michael always sat beside Dad. Lily teased everyone. Mom complained that none of us took enough leftovers home. Sometimes I'd look around the table and think, nothing could ever break this family apart. I wish that memory weren't so painful now, because only a few months later, that same dining room would become the place where my own parents looked me in the eyes and called me a liar. Everything started because of an assignment. One Monday morning, my editor dropped a thin folder onto my desk. "Grace, I've got something different for you." I opened it. Inside were anonymous tips, financial documents, several handwritten notes. Across the front page, someone had written, "Youth Center Grant Investigation." I frowned. "The Carter Youth Center?" My editor nodded. "We've received 6 anonymous complaints." "About what?" "Missing grant money." I stared at him. There has to be some mistake. Maybe. That's why we're investigating. I looked back at the folder. My stomach tightened. The nonprofit wasn't just another local organization. It was Michael's organization. My brother's. "I can't do this." "You can." "No. It's a conflict of interest." He leaned back in his chair. "Then prove the complaints are false. And if they aren't?" He looked directly at me. "Then you'll have a decision to make." I laughed nervously. "My own brother? I hope the accusations aren't true." "So do I." He folded his arms. "But hope isn't evidence." I picked up the folder and walked out of his office. At that moment, I still believed the investigation would clear Michael's name. I had no idea that opening that folder would eventually cost me my family, long before it exposed the truth. I spent the next 2 weeks hoping the anonymous complaints would fall apart. Every reporter secretly wants the truth. But sometimes, you also pray the truth isn't what you're beginning to suspect. At first, nothing looked unusual. The Carter Youth Center had won several state grants over the years. It offered after-school tutoring, free meals, summer programs, scholarships. Everything appeared exactly the way Michael had always described it. Then I noticed something small. One invoice appeared twice. Same amount. Same vendor. Different payment dates. Probably a bookkeeping error. I marked it anyway. The next morning I found another duplicate. Then another. By the end of the week, there were 12. I convinced myself there had to be a reasonable explanation. Michael had dozens of volunteers. Accounting mistakes happened. I wanted to believe that. More than anyone. I called Michael, before writing a single word. "Hey, little sister." His voice sounded cheerful. "You never call during work hours. I need to ask you something." "Sure." "It's about the youth center." "A pause." "What about it?" "I'm reviewing some grant records." Another pause. Longer this time. Then he laughed. "You're investigating me?" "I'm investigating anonymous complaints." "Same thing. I'm giving you a chance to explain." He sighed. "You really think I'd steal from kids?" "I didn't say that. But you're wondering it." "No. I'm wondering why these numbers don't match." "They'll match if you understand nonprofit accounting." "Then help me understand." His voice became noticeably colder. "Grace, this isn't just another story. I know. Our family's name is attached to that building. I know. If people hear you're investigating me, the rumors alone could destroy everything I've built. I looked out my office window. I'm trying to stop rumors. I'm looking for facts. So stop looking. I frowned. What? You heard me. Drop it. I'm a reporter. You're my sister. The silence between us felt heavier than anything either of us had said. Finally, he whispered. Please. Trust me. I wanted to. God, I wanted to. But journalism had taught me something my childhood never had. Trust and verification are not the same thing. 3 days later, I requested copies of additional financial reports through public records. The clerk looked uncomfortable. Someone already asked for these. Who? I can't tell you. That answer bothered me. Someone else was asking the same questions, which meant I wasn't chasing ghosts anymore. I was chasing something real. That Sunday, our family gathered for dinner as usual. Mom had made roast chicken. Dad was telling one of his terrible jokes. Lily was laughing so hard she nearly spilled her drink. For a few minutes, everything felt normal. Then Michael set down his fork. So? He looked directly at me. Still investigating me? Every conversation stopped. Mom looked from him to me. What investigation? I swallowed. It's just work. Michael laughed. Work? She's trying to prove I stole charity money. Mom's face immediately changed. Grace. Tell me that's not true. I'm reviewing financial records. Dad frowned. Against your own brother? I didn't choose the assignment. But you're still doing it. I looked at Michael. You could answer my questions. I already did. No. You told me to stop asking. Mom's voice grew sharper. Grace. Your brother has dedicated his entire life to helping children. I know. So why would you even entertain these accusations? Because evidence doesn't care whose name is on the paperwork. Michael shook his head sadly. I can't believe this. You actually think I'm capable of something like that? I haven't accused you. But you suspect me. I suspect the records. Dad slammed his hand onto the table. That's enough. The room fell silent. He pointed toward me. Do you have proof your brother stole anything? I hesitated. No. Then what you're doing is hurting your own family over speculation. I'm trying to find out the truth. Mom's eyes filled with tears. The truth? The truth is, your brother has sacrificed everything for this town. What have anonymous cowards ever sacrificed? I felt something break inside me. Not because they defended Michael. Because none of them asked to see the documents. None of them asked what I'd actually found. They had already decided. The next morning, someone leaked information about the investigation. By lunchtime, social media was flooded with posts. Reporter targets her own brother. Jealous sister tries to destroy local hero. Family should come before fame. I hadn't published a single article. I hadn't accused Michael publicly. Yet somehow, the entire town already believed I was attacking him. My editor walked into my office holding his phone. You need to see this. There were hundreds of comments. Some called me dishonest. Others called me bitter. One message simply read, Liar. I stared at the screen. What are they talking about? He sighed. Someone's controlling the narrative before the facts come out. Looking back, I should have realized that wasn't panic. It was strategy. Because while I was still searching for evidence, someone else had already decided to destroy my credibility first. And I hadn't even discovered the worst part yet. I told myself the rumors would die down. Rumors always fade when the facts come out. At least, that's what I believed. But I was wrong. Facts move slowly. Lies travel at the speed of outrage. Within a week, strangers recognized me at the grocery store. A woman pulled her shopping cart away when I walked down the aisle. An older man shook his head as I passed. You should be ashamed. I stopped. I'm sorry? You don't destroy your own family for a headline. Before I could answer, he turned and walked away. He didn't know me. He didn't know the investigation. He only knew the version of the story someone wanted him to believe. Things became even worse at work. One afternoon, my editor called me into his office. He looked exhausted. I just got another call. From who? The mayor. I stared at him. What does the mayor have to do with this? He says local business owners are furious. They're threatening to pull advertising if we publish anything about the youth center. I felt sick. So they're trying to pressure the newspaper. He nodded. They're calling it irresponsible journalism. And what do you think? He looked at me for a long moment. I think someone powerful is working very hard to make sure this story never reaches print. For the first time, I realized this wasn't just about my brother anymore. Someone else had a lot to lose. That Friday evening, my parents asked me to come over. "We need to talk," Mom said over the phone. Her voice sounded calm. I hoped that meant they were finally ready to listen. I was wrong. The moment I walked into the living room, I knew it wasn't a conversation. It was an intervention. Mom, Dad, Michael, Lily, even my Aunt Carol was there. Everyone looked serious. No one smiled. Dad motioned toward an empty chair. "Sit down." I obeyed. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Finally, Mom reached across the coffee table and took my hand. "Grace, we're worried about you." My stomach tightened. "Worried?" Michael sighed dramatically. "You're obsessed." "I'm doing my job." "No. You're convincing yourself ordinary accounting errors are crimes." I looked directly at him. "Then explain the duplicate payments." "They've already been explained." "Not to me," Dad interrupted. "They don't have to be." I blinked. "What?" "You're not an auditor. You're his sister." The room became painfully quiet. Mom squeezed my hand. "Sweetheart, people are talking." "I know. Your father's business is losing customers." I turned toward Dad. "Is that true?" He nodded slowly. "They think our family is fighting publicly." I looked around the room. "So that's what this is about? Our reputation?" Nobody answered. That silence told me everything. Michael leaned forward. "There is an easy solution." I already knew I wasn't going to like it. "What solution?" "Tell your editor the anonymous tips were unreliable." "I can't." "You haven't published anything, so no harm is done." I'd be lying. He smiled patiently, almost like he was talking to a child. "No, you'd be protecting your family." I laughed in disbelief. "Those aren't the same thing." Mom's voice cracked. "Grace, sometimes doing the right thing means protecting the people you love." I looked at her. "And what if protecting you means betraying myself?" She couldn't answer. Then Michael reached into a folder beside his chair. He slid a typed document across the coffee table. "What's this?" "A statement." I picked it up. The first sentence made my blood run cold. "I, Grace Carter, acknowledge that I misunderstood publicly available financial records and deeply regret making false assumptions that caused unnecessary harm." I looked up slowly. "You want me to sign this?" Dad answered. "It will end all of this. It says I made false accusations." "You practically did. I never accused him publicly. But people think you did." I stared at my father. "So your solution is to make me confess to something I didn't do?" Michael spoke softly. "Grace, sometimes one person's sacrifice protects everyone else." There it was. The sentence that haunted me for years. One person's sacrifice. Mine. I stood up. "I'm not signing it." Mom began crying. "Please, I can't." Dad's face hardened. "If you walk out that door, don't expect us to support what happens next." I looked at him. "What does that mean?" "It means choices have consequences." "So does silence." Michael folded his arms. "You've changed." "No, I've just stopped confusing loyalty with honesty." Without another word, I walked toward the front door. Behind me, Mom called my name. I almost turned around. Almost. Looking back now, I'm grateful I didn't. Because if I had stayed, I might have signed away the only thing I still had. My integrity. 3 days later, I was suspended from the investigation. Not because the evidence was weak. Because anonymous complaints had been filed against me. Conflict of interest. Professional misconduct. Harassment. Every accusation was false, but they were enough. The newspaper reassigned the story to another reporter. 2 weeks later, the investigation quietly disappeared. No article. No follow-up. Nothing. Just silence. Then came the final blow. My landlord knocked on my apartment door. "I'm sorry, Grace. The building's been sold. You have 30 days. I couldn't afford the higher rent. Between reduced work, legal consultations, and the growing pressure from the community, my savings disappeared almost overnight. Within 2 months, I had lost my assignment, my reputation, my apartment, and almost every relationship I thought would last forever. I remember sitting alone in my car one rainy evening, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my hands hurt. For the first time in my life, I wondered if everyone else was right. Maybe I should have stayed quiet. Maybe telling the truth wasn't worth losing everything. But deep inside, one thought refused to disappear. If I walked away now, whoever was hiding behind those financial records would win. What I didn't know was that someone else had also refused to give up. Someone I had never met. Someone who had been gathering evidence in complete silence. And years later, that stranger would hand me the proof my family had demanded all along. The day I packed my apartment, it didn't feel like I was moving. It felt like I was admitting defeat. Every cardboard box held a different version of the life I thought I was building. My journalism textbooks, my first press badge, the notebook where I'd written every lead, every interview, every question about the youth center investigation. I almost threw it away. Almost. Instead, I placed it in the very last box. Something inside me whispered, "You'll need this one day." At the time, I thought it was hope. Years later, I realized it was instinct. With nowhere else to go, I accepted a reporting job nearly 400 miles away in Street Louis. It wasn't investigative journalism anymore. The newspaper covered local events, school sports, community festivals, restaurant openings, safe stories, stories that made advertisers happy. For months, I hated every assignment. Every time I covered a ribbon-cutting ceremony or a charity fundraiser, I remembered why I'd become a journalist in the first place. Truth wasn't supposed to be comfortable, but I had learned a painful lesson. Sometimes surviving comes before changing the world. Looking back, I wish someone had told me that surviving isn't quitting. Sometimes, it's the bravest thing you can do. The first year was lonely. Birthdays passed without phone calls from my parents. Thanksgiving came and went. Christmas cards stopped arriving. The only person who contacted me regularly was Lily. Even then, our conversations were awkward. She never mentioned Michael. She never mentioned the investigation. It was as if our family had silently agreed to erase me, instead of admitting they might have been wrong. One evening, Lily finally asked the question she'd been avoiding. "Grace, do you really believe Michael did something illegal?" I stared out my apartment window for a long time before answering. "I don't know." She sounded surprised. "You don't know?" "No. I know the records didn't make sense. I know someone worked very hard to stop the investigation. But believing someone is guilty and proving it are two different things." There was a long silence. Finally, she whispered, "I wish Mom and Dad understood that." So do we. That conversation gave me something I hadn't felt in years. Not certainty. Not victory. Just the smallest hint that maybe not everyone in my family had stopped listening. Life slowly became steady again. I earned promotions. Learned data journalism. Took courses in forensic accounting. If I couldn't investigate corruption anymore, I wanted to understand exactly how people hid it. Ironically, the case that had destroyed my career became the reason I became a much better reporter. Failure has a strange way of teaching lessons success never could. By my 10th year in Street Louis, I had won 2 regional journalism awards. Neither one made me as proud as something much smaller. A handwritten letter from a reader. It simply said, "Thank you for asking questions everyone else was afraid to ask." I kept that letter inside my desk drawer. Whenever I doubted myself, I read it again. Then, 13 years after I left home, an unfamiliar email arrived just before midnight. The subject line contained only 4 words. "You were never wrong." At first, I assumed it was spam, but something made me open it. Inside was a short message. "Grace Carter, I've spent the last 7 years auditing nonprofit organizations across 3 states. Your brother's organization was selected for a federal review 6 months ago. What we found matches the concerns you raised years ago. There are people who would like to speak with you. You deserved to be believed. Please call me." Attached to the email was a single document, 1 page, covered with official federal letterhead. At the bottom, a familiar signature, Michael Carter, and beside it, a financial authorization that should never have existed. I stared at the screen for nearly an hour. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone. For 13 years, everyone had asked me the same question. "Where's your proof?" Now, proof had found me. What I didn't know was that the evidence was only the first surprise, because the investigators were about to reveal something even more devastating. Michael hadn't acted alone, and the people who helped protect him included someone my family trusted more than anyone else. I didn't sleep that night. The email stayed open on my laptop until sunrise. Every few minutes, I reread the same sentence. You deserve to be believed. For 13 years, those were the only 4 words I'd wanted to hear. Not from strangers, from my family. Instead, a federal investigator was the first person to say them. The next morning, I called the number in the email. A woman answered. Office of the Inspector General. This is Special Investigator Rachel Bennett. My name is Grace Carter. There was a brief pause. I've been hoping you'd call. 3 days later, I was sitting inside a federal office building, staring at a conference table covered with files. Rachel slid one binder toward me. I want you to understand something before you open this. I nodded. We're not asking whether your brother made bookkeeping mistakes. She leaned forward. We're investigating organized fraud. The words hit me harder than I expected. Organized fraud. Not accounting errors. Not poor management. Fraude. I slowly opened the binder. Inside were bank transfers, shell companies, forged invoices, false grant reports. The duplicate payments I'd discovered 13 years earlier were only the beginning. Millions of dollars intended for disadvantaged children had quietly disappeared over nearly a decade. Every suspicious transaction had eventually led to one signature. Michael Carter. Tears blurred my vision. Not because he had betrayed me, because he had betrayed children who trusted him. Children whose scholarships had quietly vanished while adults applauded him at fundraising dinners. I whispered, I wanted to be wrong. Rachel nodded. Most whistleblowers do. Then she pushed a second binder across the table. This one is harder. I frowned. Why? Because your brother wasn't working alone. My heart started racing. I opened the binder. The first page listed several names. Board members, financial officers, grant administrators. Then I saw one name that made my stomach drop. Daniel Harper. I blinked. Our family attorney? Rachel nodded. He handled the youth center's legal paperwork for years. He also drafted several of the contracts used to move money between organizations. I couldn't breathe. Daniel Harper had been my father's closest friend for more than 25 years. He came to every Thanksgiving dinner, every Christmas, every birthday. He had watched me grow up. When my grandmother died, he sat in the front row beside my parents. And all those years, he had helped hide the fraud. Looking back now, I finally understood why the investigation had disappeared so quickly. It had never been just Michael protecting himself. An entire network had been protecting one another. Rachel wasn't finished. There's something else. She handed me a sealed envelope. We found this during a search warrant. Across the front, someone had written my name. Inside was a typed memo. It wasn't addressed to me. It was addressed to Michael. I recognized Daniel Harper's signature immediately. The final paragraph froze my blood. Grace's credibility is the only real threat. If people stop believing her, the investigation dies with her. Keep the family united against her. Public sympathy will do the rest. I read it again, and again, for 13 years. I believed my family had rejected me because they trusted Michael more. Now I learned something even worse. They had been manipulated. Someone had deliberately turned my own parents against me. Turned my brother into the victim. Turned me into the liar. Not by proving I was wrong, but by making sure no one listened long enough to find out. Within weeks, federal agents executed search warrants across 3 counties. Bank records were seized. Computers confiscated. Former employees began cooperating. One after another, people started talking, not because they suddenly became brave, because they finally realized they weren't the only ones who had seen something suspicious. Then the newspaper articles began appearing. Not one, not 2, dozens. Every major news station covered the story. The headlines were painfully familiar. Beloved youth charity under federal investigation. Millions missing from children's programs. Community hero accused of decade-long fraud scheme. The same town that had called me a liar. Now read my story on every front page. My phone exploded with missed calls. Former neighbors. Old classmates. People who hadn't spoken to me in over a decade. Then came the calls I knew would eventually arrive. Mom. Dad. Lily. Even my Aunt Carol. But one name never appeared. Michael. Because while my family was desperately trying to reach me, my brother was sitting alone in an interrogation room. And for the first time in his life, no reputation could save him. Michael's trial began 9 months later. By then, the youth center had been closed. The building that once echoed with children's laughter now sat behind a chain-link fence covered with legal notices. The mural local students had painted years earlier had faded beneath months of rain. I drove past it before the trial started. Not because I wanted to remember. Because I wanted to remind myself what this case had never really been about. It wasn't about my brother. It wasn't about my family. It was about every child who had trusted adults to protect them. The courthouse was packed. Reporters lined the hallway. Television cameras filled the front steps. People who had once defended Michael now refused to meet one another's eyes. Some recognized me. A few quietly apologized as I walked by. I should have listened. I'm sorry. I believed the wrong person. For years, I had imagined hearing those words. I thought they would heal something inside me. They didn't. An apology cannot return birthdays you spent alone. It cannot erase 13 years of being called a liar. Some wounds don't disappear. They simply stop bleeding. When I entered the courtroom, I saw my parents sitting together in the second row. They looked older. Smaller somehow. My mother noticed me first. She immediately stood. Grace. Her voice cracked. I walked toward them slowly. Dad couldn't even look me in the eyes. Finally, he whispered, "We were wrong." 3 words. 13 years too late. Mom reached for my hands. "We should have believed you." Tears streamed down her face. "I know." She looked surprised by my answer. "I've known that for a long time." Dad swallowed hard. "I chose protecting our family's name instead of protecting my daughter." He paused before adding, "And I have to live with that for the rest of my life." For the first time since this nightmare began, no one blamed rumors. No one blamed misunderstandings. No one asked me to forgive them. They simply accepted responsibility. Oddly enough, that honesty meant more than any apology ever could. The prosecutor called me as one of the final witnesses. Unlike 13 years earlier, no one interrupted me. No one questioned my motives. No one suggested I was confused. The prosecutor asked one simple question. "Miss Carter, when did you first realize something was wrong?" I took a deep breath. "The day I chose evidence over comfort." He nodded. "And what happened after you spoke up?" "My family called me a liar." "Were you?" "No." "How do you know?" I looked across the courtroom at Michael, then toward the jury. Because the truth doesn't change just because people refuse to believe it. The courtroom became completely silent. Michael eventually chose to testify. For the first hour, he denied everything. He blamed employees, accounting software, grant administrators, even federal investigators. Then the prosecutor displayed the memo written by Daniel Harper, the one instructing him to destroy my credibility. Michael stared at the screen. He knew it was over. His attorney quietly whispered something into his ear. A few seconds later, Michael lowered his head. "I'd like to change my statement." The judge nodded. For nearly 40 minutes, my brother admitted everything. The false invoices, the hidden accounts, the coordinated lies, even the campaign to convince everyone that I couldn't be trusted. Then he said something I never expected. I wasn't afraid of prison. He looked toward me for the first time. I was afraid Grace would keep asking questions. Those words echoed through the courtroom. Every person there finally understood why I had been labeled the liar. Not because I lied, because I was the only person who refused to stop looking. The verdict came before sunset. Guilty on every major count. Michael was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. Daniel Harper received an even longer sentence because of his role in orchestrating the fraud and obstructing the investigation. As deputies escorted Michael away, he stopped beside my family's row. He looked at Mom, then Dad. Finally, at me. "I'm sorry." I believed he meant it. But some apologies arrive after they've lost the power to change what matters most. I nodded once, not because everything was forgiven, because hatred had already taken enough years from my life. I wasn't going to give it another day. As I walked out of the courthouse, dozens of reporters called my name. This time, I didn't stop for the cameras. I stopped for 2 children standing beside the courthouse steps. They were holding handmade signs. One read, "Thank you for telling the truth." The other simply said, "We believed you." And somehow, those 4 words healed more than every headline ever could. People often assume this story is about proving I was right. It isn't. It's about what happens when people become more afraid of embarrassment than they are of the truth. For years, I wondered whether my family had loved me any less than they loved Michael. I don't believe that anymore. They loved us both. The tragedy was that fear became louder than love. Fear of gossip, fear of scandal, fear of losing the respect of neighbors. And once fear took control, the easiest person to sacrifice became the one asking difficult questions. Me. Today, my parents and I have a relationship again. Not the one we used to have. That version disappeared a long time ago. What we've built now is quieter, more honest. My father never misses a chance to tell people something he wishes he had understood years earlier. If someone you love brings you uncomfortable evidence, listen before you judge. Mom volunteers with organizations that support whistleblowers and victims of financial fraud. She says it's her way of making sure another family doesn't repeat our mistakes. Lily and I became close again. In many ways, losing our brother brought us back to each other. Life has a strange sense of irony. As for me, I never stopped being a journalist. If anything, those 13 painful years made me a better one. Whenever a young reporter asks me for advice, I always tell them the same thing. Never confuse popularity with integrity. Because the crowd isn't always wrong, but neither is the person standing alone. Sometimes, the loneliest voice in the room is the one telling the truth. And if this journey taught me anything, it's this. A lie can protect a reputation for years. But the truth has something far more powerful. Time. Given enough of it, the truth almost always finds its way into the light. If you've stayed with me until the very end, thank you for listening. Now I'd really like to hear what you think. If you were in Grace's position, would you have kept investigating your own brother, even if it meant losing your family? Or would you have walked away to protect the people you loved? And here's another question. Do you think Grace's parents deserve forgiveness after finally admitting they were wrong? Or did they wait too long to earn a second chance? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Every perspective adds something meaningful to the conversation, and you never know who might need to hear your story. If you enjoy emotional family drama, revenge stories, hidden family secrets, and true-to-life stories about betrayal, justice, and redemption, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. We upload new stories every week, stories that remind us that the truth may be delayed, but it is never defeated. Until next time, take care of yourself, trust your conscience, and never let someone else's reputation become more important than the truth.